Hello and welcome to another Josh Plays 40k painting tutorial. Today I will be painting a B1 Battle Droid from the Star Wars Legion box set. And we've chosen a crouch down model for this particular tutorial to try and sort of show the how the paint will side down the model and how it sits on one that just isn't standing still. And obviously that will just give a bit more depth in terms of showing how to stop any sort of unwanted pooling when we get to obviously applying the main colours over the model. This tutorial is designed to be a nice sort of easy and sort of quick method to get good looking droids onto the battlefield in good time for games. I'll also be sort of elaborating sort of closer to the end of the tutorial on doing some sort of squad markings on the model. So for example, the couple I've finished here, this particular one he's got the red stripes down the side, and then quite specific to only a couple of droids as to what I own currently is the yellow determining the leaders of each squad. Obviously I will be able to show you the particular one that I'm going to have for this squad, which will actually be blue banding for this particular model. So without further ado, let's grab some brushes and get started. So as you can see here, the miniature is primed in a white spray. For this I've actually used the Games Workshop White Scar, however any sort of white paint will do. You could also use Wraithbone undercoat if you choose, as that will still give a sort of warm texture to the sort of brown feel of the droid. But I would avoid going with any sort of greys, because that will sort of start taking the tone out that we're looking for. But a white or a warmer undercoat will be fine. And then first of all we're going to start with applying the all over shade to the main body of the model. For this we're going to be using Skeleton Horde contrast paint. This is a great colour to match the sort of brown aesthetic that these droids have. And we're going to use a slightly smaller brush than a shade brush. I'm actually using a small base brush from Games Workshop for this one, as it sort of allows me to have good brush control over the model, as it's not obviously a large area. But basically pick sort of bit by bit and obviously just sort of work your way around. So instead of sort of slapping it on like you would perhaps with a normal sort of shade, as if you were covering the whole miniature, I would sort of pick a certain area. So for this, as you can see here, I've gone with the leg, and then just sort of go over the top of all of that area, and then we can sort of be happy with what we've done. Now if you get the pooling like you probably just saw there in this particular joint, if I just reapply that just for ease, what we don't want is it sitting in these recesses or in any of the gaps that we want to be more clean and crisp. And what we're going to do here is, when that happens, is just clean off your brush and then just use the bristles just to take that paint away. Now obviously the colour will remain underneath and you'll still get that really nice sort of shaded effect. But what it won't do is clog up that detail and obviously take away the aesthetic as to what we're trying to achieve with the droids, because naturally obviously when you see them on the screen or on the pictures, they don't have that to them, and obviously they are supposed to be obviously a clean metal front. So obviously work your way around each of the sort of areas of the model. Obviously don't worry about the gun itself. You can leave that because that's going to be obviously black for the blasters, but obviously work your way around all of the body of the miniature, and then we can come back and carry on. Once you've applied that Skeleton Horde all over the body, we're now going to block in that black blaster, and for this we're going to use the Black Legion contrast paint. And we're just going to swap down to a smaller brush now, and we're just going to very carefully sort of coat that over the top, obviously avoiding the hands as well. Now obviously I know that a few of these models do come with slightly larger blasters, and also the option to fit a sort of rocket launcher on one as well. Now obviously you would do all of these in the same colour, all in black, including the Sergeant's binoculars as well. Now obviously if you do choose you wish to do that a different colour, you're more than welcome, but just for sort of in keeping purposes I went for the black. So sort of carefully work your way around the blaster, and then we can move on to the next stage. Well, once you've let that black dry, we're now going to do a very light dry brush over the main body of the miniature with Tyrant Skull, and we are, as I say, just literally just a very light brush over the top of that brown, just to sort of pick out any of the sort of raised edges and give them a little bit more of a highlight, rather than trying to obviously go in with edge highlighting with a brush. Again, this obviously saves time as well, so you can add as sort of much or as little of this as you wish. I mean, looking at the models themselves, you don't actually really need to. It's not sort of mandatory to add this highlight, and if you are looking just for a nice sort of speedy technique, then you can certainly skip this part. But certainly just to, so especially if you did get any areas that were a little darker than you wanted with the shade, you can certainly look to try and sort of lighten it up with this highlight now. Once you've applied that dry brush, we're now going to put a highlight onto the black blaster, and for this we're going to move on to Mechanicus Standard Grey, and for this we are just literally going to pick out any of the sort of raised edges onto the blaster itself, so any sort of sharp edges of the lights are going to catch. So for instance, sort of right on the very top here, we're just going to run our brush down the top and pick out that ridge, as well as sort of any sharp edges. So again, you can add as much or as little of this as you wish, depending on obviously what sort of stance the model is taking. Might determine how much highlighting you want to do, but otherwise just sort of carefully take your time, obviously work your way around and try not to hit any of the other details that you've already finished. So at this point you could call the model finished if you wanted. There is nothing wrong with that. It's good tabletop standards, and again matches a lot of the schemes that you see in the films and TV shows. But what we're going to do, just to sort of finish them off, and what I showed you earlier with regards to the ones I've done before, so particularly with this one where you've got the red on the shoulder pads, and then obviously the sort of sergeants of the model have yellow. But for this particular squad, I'm going to go for a blue finish, and for this I'm actually using McCrag blue, but any blue will do. When you get to these sort of colours, you can sort of pick and choose whatever really scheme you go for. I've seen some examples where literally an army is made up of so many squads of these models, and they're all different colours. So you've got, I think I saw one once where they were, one squad was blue, green, red, and so on. But for this, there's a few obviously places where you're going to want to apply the paint, and again I would recommend a smaller brush. But for the blue parts here, you're going to pick out the sort of inlays of the shoulders, or what would be shoulders and arm joints. So this particular part here, being obviously careful not to get it onto the torso too much, but there is a sort of nice indent and cut to the model. I'm not sure if the camera picks that up particularly well, but just sort of picking out that interior part there, and obviously this will apply to both sides of the miniature. And then sticking with the arms again, what you're going to do is, once you've filled in this sort of shoulder part, you're going to look at the sort of outer part of the arm here. Now, so for depending on what sort of angle the arms are at, you'll want to sort of cut this either sort of lengthwise or vertical. But for this arm here, which is sort of sticking out across here, we're going to come onto this sort of end of the shoulder here and just draw a line across, and then you're going to paint the sort of top half of that, and obviously then not forgetting the sort of edges as well. And then that sort of shows if the arm was to go down, it would all line up nicely with the tops of what we've already painted on the inlays. And aside from doing obviously both the shoulders, and I'll come back and do the other one shortly, you'll also pick out, and this can be a bit fiddly, but the part underneath the top of the chest and the neck here. So again, it is indented into the chest piece, but you'll just carefully want to sort of run that paint into there, and then pick that out. Now, you might find a contrast paint will flow a little easier, or you could use a little bit of flow improver on a standard paint. But as I say, I'm not using contrast here because I wouldn't want it to run into any sort of other recesses or into any other parts of the model that I don't want to be this colour. So, which obviously then makes it quite tricky to fix with this with the base coat of the brown. So once you've got that in there, the only last parts of the details left to do is on the backs of the head here. You'll want to pick out the sort of very tips of the sort of talons coming down. So just obviously catching these parts here, and then sort of going across and doing the same on the other side. And then finally, the last detail to do with the blue is on the bottom of the torso here, where these two panels sort of overlap. You'll do a gentle line just going down the side here. Now this will be a bit more freehand than what we have done, but it will just go in line with where the middle of the torso goes, and then coming to the front of the model, it will run along the base of that overlay as well. So again, blue line going across, obviously try and be as neat as possible, and then the same down the other side at that angle. Now obviously sometimes the arms may make it slightly more restrictive to get to these areas. Obviously just try and do as much of the field of vision as you possibly can, so that obviously you know yourselves that you've not missed anything. So obviously once you're happy with that line, that is then all ready to dry. And there we have a finished B1 Battle Droid ready to take to the tabletop and win for the Separatist army. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or feedback, please leave them in the comments below. I'll happily come back to you. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.